What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, we're going to take a look at which teams have the best fixtures from game week 17, which is when the league restarts, right up until game week 22. And then more importantly, should we actually be considering any players from those teams in our squad? So if you do enjoy the video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you're new around here. And just before we jump into it, over the next week and a half or so before that game week 17 deadline, there's going to be a lot of discussion around teams and players that do have double game weeks. So because of that, I've specifically not included them in this video. We're only going to go through teams that don't have a double game week, right? So the likes of Chelsea, Man City, Spurs, etc. They're not included in this video, but I know we're going to cover them a lot over the next week and a half, right? So that's why they're not in this one. So we're going to start off with Leicester. Now, to be fair, if you were just looking on a kind of 2 game week basis, Newcastle at home and Liverpool away is not necessarily the best way to kind of kick things back off. But over the first 4 game weeks, Newcastle at home, Fulham at home, and Nottingham Forest away, with Liverpool away thrown in, doesn't look quite so bad. I think if you're looking at the likes of Danny Ward, for example, at 4.1 million, he's going to be in a lot of people's squads. I still think it's possibly viable to have him as your main goalkeeper along with Everson, right? So obviously if Ward, gets suspended, injured, etc., Everson can just come in. There are obviously some goalkeepers with double game weeks, but either way, for 4.1 million, he's either going to be your main goalkeeper or probably your bench goalkeeper instead. So he's definitely one to include. I think if I was going to go for an attacker, Maddison's the only one I would really look at. His expected goal involvement's pretty decent at 0.45. We know he takes a lot of the set pieces as well. I think Harvey Barnes has done okay, but as I kind of discussed on my current draft video yesterday, there's a lot of midfielders to choose from. And for anyone that goes for a 4 midfield setup, I just don't see where Harvey Barnes fits in. So I probably wouldn't go for him. And then you look at the forwards, there's just not a huge amount of nailed on options in that Leicester side. And one thing I've done as well is kind of put just a few basic numbers together. So we've got the expected goals per 90 minutes for them as a team. We've got the same for expected goals conceded for their defence as well. And then which player from each position currently has the highest points per match. Obviously, the goalkeeper is always going to be obvious. But top midfielder is Maddison, 5.9 points per match. The top forward is Daka, 2.8 points per match. And part of the problem is they very rarely get to 90 minutes. They don't necessarily start every single game. Sometimes they're making cameos off the bench, etc. So Daka might start, maybe 4 of the first 6 games or something like that, but not starting every game is a bit of a pain, and he very rarely gets to 70 minutes either. You can't rely on Vardy anymore, and Ian actually just never seems to get a look in either. So I think if you're going to go for an attacker, it has to be Maddison. Obviously, there's a lot of competition for those midfield spots, but if you want someone from Leicester for those 2 nice fixtures, particularly in game weeks 19 and 20, he's probably the one to look at. Their defence has not been great. 1.43 expected goals conceded puts them at 18th best in the league, and obviously there's only 20 teams, so they've not been great. We did see, I don't know, they kind of went on both ends of the scale where they were awful for the first kind of few games, and then they were pretty good in terms of goals conceded for the second half of the first part of the season. I've got to keep saying that, it just sounds weird. I think they're probably somewhere in between. I think they're a bit better than 18th, but they're probably not top 10 or anything like that. So I wouldn't necessarily go out of my way to include Leicester defenders outside of Danny Ward, because obviously he's just such a good price. Luke Thomas might get a few more minutes now because of the injuries they've got in that defence, obviously to James Justin. I think Ricardo is still out as well. He's only 4.2 million, hasn't played a huge amount of games, so I would ignore his expected goal involvement for the most part. But if I was going to go for a defender, it probably just would be Castagna. Spend that extra 0.5. His attacking numbers have been okay so far this season. He's probably the one to look at. I wouldn't necessarily go for the centre-backs over him, although they are a little bit cheaper. But ultimately, for me, for Leicester, the fixtures are quite good, but I would like to avoid those first 2 if I could. And by doing that, it means you're already booking a transfer, and I'm just not sure it's worth it. So it's a bit of a tricky situation for Leicester. I mean, there's nothing to say that Maddison can't get points in those first 2 fixtures. You just wish they were slightly better. So in attack, I think it has to be Maddison. Danny Ward's always a great option, as you know, if you've watched this channel. And in defence, probably Castagna, but I just don't think the defence is good enough to avoid putting someone in our squad from them. So Man United are a little bit different to Leicester in that their 3 fixtures after the World Cup break are pretty decent. Then it gets trickier. In game week 20, they've got Man City at home, and in game week 21, it's Arsenal away. So from an attacking perspective, they might be more of a short-term punt that you then look to get rid of. That's not to say, of course, the Man United players can't score against Man City or Arsenal, because they've already done that so far this season, but they're not necessarily 2 fixtures that you want to go out of your way to target. Just to caveat my own point, though, the likes of Rashford and Martial are only 6.7 million. If you got to that Man City at home game, at Old Trafford in game week 20, it wouldn't be the end of the world to have to play them, right? They're less than 7 million. It wouldn't be a huge risk if either A, you want to keep them long term because they're performing well for you, or B, you've got other transfers to focus on. So I wouldn't completely rule them out. If you're asking me who's the better option between Rashford and Martial, I think if you could guarantee Martial would stay fit, I would probably say him, right? He takes up a forward spot, 0.78 expected goal involvement's pretty decent. The problem is he does have those fitness concerns all the time. And when we come back after the break, there's 3 game weeks in quick succession. So those 3 good fixtures, Forest, Wolves and Bournemouth, they're on the 27th of December, so Tuesday. Then they play Saturday. I mean, that turnaround is not too bad. But then the next game is Tuesday again. And now I think there's either a likelihood that Martial doesn't play all 3 fixtures, or he gets reduced minutes in a few of them. Like, we could see him come off in the 60th, 65th minute in all those games, right? It's possible. I think I could be completely wrong on this, but if we look at his numbers or his minutes recently, 71 to be fair, 25, then he was out injured, 28, 31. He's had a lot of injuries so far this season, just hasn't been in the squad, and I just wouldn't want to rely on him over that kind of Christmas. I say Christmas period, it's after Christmas, but you know what I mean. So I think Rashford's probably the slightly better option. I guess if it's Rashford plus a dud forward, or Martial plus Andreas Pereira, on paper the Martial and Andreas Pereira combination looks better, but I still think Rashford's probably the one that I would go for. Plus he's been in great form so far this season. Other attackers, probably Bruno Fernandes. I just don't think when we're trying to get other double game week players in our team, I've seen people start talking about 3 premium setups. I just don't see where Bruno Fernandes fits. And also, if you look at those numbers, 0.4 expected goal involvement so far this year, and not guaranteed to be on penalties, like Martial could take them when he's on the pitch. He's just not worth spending an extra 3.1 million on, I don't think. If you wanted a massive differential, you could go for him. But ultimately, if I'm picking Rashford or Fernandes for my midfield, I'm probably just saving the money and going for Rashford. In terms of defenders, I put Martinez in because he's the cheapest route into that defence. But he's not going to be available for game week 17 and possibly not game week 18 either. Because Argentina, I'm recording this before they play their semi-final. But even if they lose, they've still got that 3rd, 4th place playoff. And so does Varane as well for France. And the problem there is Man United might be missing they will be missing, their first choice centre-backs for that first game, maybe the second game as well. So it's not necessarily an ideal time to have a Man United defender because it's going to be Maguire and Lindelof instead. And look, Maguire obviously played well for England, but whether or not he'll come back and do that for Man United is yet to be seen. So if you're going to go for a defender, it's got to be Dalot or Luke Shaw. I actually quite like Luke Shaw, to be honest. But you can't really go wrong with either of them. And I guess they're less than 5 million. Luke Shaw's the same price as Dalot. They are cheap enough that you could bench in those trickier games. So if you wanted to play them for the home games, Forest, Bournemouth and Palace, and then bench them for Wolves, Man City and Arsenal, you could definitely do that. So I'm not against going for a Man United defender. I just would prefer if Martinez and Varane were back-ins. But when it comes to attackers, I think it's got to be Rashford, possibly Martial. Fernandes just too expensive for me, I think. And then you've got Newcastle, who've had a great season so far. They're in this video, so of course they've got decent fixtures as well. The most difficult one over the next 6 game weeks is Arsenal away in game week 19. But outside of that, there's plenty of fixtures there where they could get either a clean sheet and or plenty of goals as well. And don't get me wrong, the likes of West Ham at home, Leicester away, they're not necessarily easy on paper, but Newcastle have been brilliant so far, and that's backed up in the numbers. So if I just bring them up, for their attack, they're on 1.52 expected goals per 90 minutes, which puts them 4th best in the league. And then for the defence, it's 0.91 expected goals conceded per 90, which also puts them 4th best. So often, when you've got a team that's outside the traditional top 6, sometimes they will have a really good attack but a poor defence, or vice versa. For Newcastle, they are just generally very, very good. And I think at the beginning of the season, I was thinking, okay, Man City will probably win, Liverpool probably come second, then it's just which two 2 of Arsenal, Man United, Chelsea, Spurs will come in the top 4. Well, right now, Newcastle don't just have a good chance of getting into Europe, they've got a good chance, if they can keep this up, of getting into the Champions League. Now, obviously, it's going to be difficult to do that for the whole season, but if they keep those numbers up, there's every chance that they could do it. So they are definitely a team that I want to target. Goalkeeper-wise, I just think Nick Pope, if we go back to looking at this, is probably just a bit expensive right now at 5.3. I probably want to put that money elsewhere into my team. And also, for a lot of us, we got on Trippier a much lower price than 5.9 million. So if you're going to have one defensive option from Newcastle, it's probably him. He's on 6.4 points per match. Even when they don't get clean sheets, he picks up attack and returns, bonus points. He's just been incredible. And I think, he came into, he was an option at the start of the season. A lot of you, to be fair, went from him from the off. I didn't. It's not that I didn't think he'd be attacking. I just wasn't sure he'd be this attacking. 0.28 expected goal involvement. They are the similar numbers to what kind of Trent and Robertson are outputting this year. So he's just a really good option that's playing for a team that defensively has been really sound. So already he's a good option. But if you need someone a bit cheaper, because either you don't want to go for Trippier or you want to double up, then Botman for 4.4 million is also an option too. And 0.1 expected goal involvement, especially when that is mostly made up of kind of attacking goal threat, it's not that bad. It's not to be sniffed at. So he could be an option too. Then, of course, you've got Wilson up front. I do like Almiron. Don't get me wrong, 5.8 million is still a good option. And I know I've said this a few times and people don't like it, throughout this season so far. I think if you need a cheap midfielder, he may still be one of the best options. But again, there are so many midfielders to choose from, especially if you're only going for a 4-man midfield, that yes, he's good in his own right. But I think, if it was him versus maybe even Mason Mount, double game week, maybe even Foden, a Rashford, etc., I'd probably rather go for those players if I've got the money to do so. If I want to go for a 3 premium setup and I need to save some money somewhere, either in defence and or midfield, then maybe I go for Almiron. But if it's just a straight up competition from him versus like a Foden, I'd probably take Foden, although I guess he's not 100% nailed on to start every game. So maybe you just go for Almiron. There's a lot of people that are going to start with him. So let me know in the comments below, do you think Almiron is a lock for you? I think Leicester, Leeds and Fulham in particular could be plenty of goals for Newcastle. I'm definitely going to have Trippier. It's just a case of whether I have 2 or 3 in total from Newcastle. Like I said, those numbers looking real good. So Liverpool are a bit of a weird one because I do think on paper the fixtures look pretty good, but by my reckoning, none of them are really green fixtures. That being said, I could still see them scoring plenty of goals. The bigger question is probably whether or not we go for one of their defenders. But let's start off with the attack first of all. So we know that Diogo Jota and Luis Diaz are going to be missing after the World Cup break. There are reports going around that Luis Diaz could be out for up to 3 months, which is obviously a big miss for Liverpool. Diogo Jota, I don't think is going to be out for quite that long, but he's probably going to miss at least the first 3 to 4 game weeks after the break, and maybe even more. So we can just reassess later on. So straight away, that says to me that Darwin Núñez's minutes are going to be pretty good, and that 1.04 expected goal involvement looks pretty nice to me. And I know, and I've said this before so far this season, he can be frustrating. You own him in your FPL team, he gets those chances, he just doesn't seem to convert them. At some point it's going to happen. With those expected goal involvement numbers, I just don't see how it can. And in general, if we look at Liverpool's numbers, they've been pretty good, right? I think if you ask people how Liverpool have played so far this season, they would say not that well, and yet they've still put up 1.73 expected goals per 90 minutes, which puts them third, and they're not that far behind what Man City and Arsenal have done so far this year. So defensively, not great. 1.25 expected goals conceded per 90 puts them 10th, but from an attacking point of view, they have been pretty good so far. The one thing I will say, and I've just noticed the Daka thing, just ignore that, Firmino is on 5.3 points per match, so he's actually the better forward so far from a points perspective. But when you look at those expected goal involvement numbers, at some point I think Núñez is just going to overtake Firmino, so that's probably where I will be looking to go if I was putting a Liverpool forward in my team. The other option from an attacking perspective is Salah. You could look at someone like Harvey Elliott, I guess. He's pretty cheap. He got pretty decent minutes before the World Cup break, but I don't know, again, if he's the kind of player that you'd want to find a midfield spot for in your teams. Like for a bit more money, you could get Almiron, for example. But Salah at 12.8 is definitely an option. I think in my latest draft, I had De Bruyne and Mason Mount. That could be Salah and Foden instead, for example. I guess the key thing for me with Salah is he's had that break over the World Cup. So he's going to be fresh, he's going to be fit, raring to go. And they are all really big pluses, right? And obviously his expected goal involvement is pretty decent still. He's on penalties, his minutes are going to be excellent. He's going to play in all those games, I would expect. But I don't know when I'm going to captain him, right? That is a big consideration for me when I'm looking to pick premium players. I guess, to be fair, most of the time, if it's going to be Haaland captain, that also means I'm not going to captain De Bruyne either. So maybe that should put Salah a little bit higher in the list of, kind of players I want. But when you look at the FPL screen, for example, if we come over to the FPL page, in Game Week 17, it's Man City versus Leeds away. And then Liverpool got Villa away. So you'd probably go for Haaland over Salah. And let's not forget, Salah's had a break, so has Haaland. In Game Week 18, Liverpool got Leicester at home. Man City have got Everton at home. So most people, even probably me, will go for Haaland. In Game Week 19, the double game week start. So Fulham have got Leicester away and Chelsea at home. I would probably captain Mitrovic instead of Salah versus Brentford, and even kind of Haaland, who's got Chelsea away. So definitely going to go for Mitrovic. Game week 20, I think there's another double game week. Liverpool have got Brighton away, Man City and Man United away, and they've also got Spurs at home. So you're going to go for Haaland with 2 games over Salah, right? We're not going to go through every single game week, but you kind of get the point I'm trying to make. So I know what people said in the comments section on the current draft video I did, that am I really going to go without Salah? Probably not. But I think if I was ever going to do it, it might be over the next few game weeks with those double game weeks, with that Haaland captaincy. Maybe just stick De Bruyne in for the extra games and look to switch back to Salah at a later date. Basically, it's not to like, if you don't go for a player now, it doesn't mean you can never get them back in. It's just, if I'm going to go without him, maybe this is the time. I'll have to give it some strong consideration. The fact that he's had a break really does make me want to have him, though, if I can. So maybe I might look at those 3 premium setups. But we know that Salah and Nunez are both good options. I think with the defenders, they're just starting to look quite expensive. Like, their expected goal involvement, 0.3 for Trent and 0.29 for Robertson. They're both really good compared to other defenders. But for Trent, for example, that is way down on last year from how good he was, from assists and a goal perspective last year. So I'm not quite sure about it. And when you look at these numbers, like 10th in the league for Liverpool is just not great. And that's not to say they can't improve, because of course they can. But it's just whether or not you back them to do that with the fixtures they've got over the next 6 weeks. Like Villa away, obviously got Emery in charge now. Leicester always seem to be able to get a goal. Brentford away, you got Tony. Brighton away are always a tough team to go and play against. Then you got Chelsea. I just don't know if there's many clean sheets there for Liverpool. So it wouldn't put me off going for Trent, because if they can get a few clean sheets, we know he can get attack and returns as well. But if it's like him versus Cancelo, again, coming back to those double game weeks, then it's pretty hard to justify the Liverpool defender. So I've got no Liverpool players in my draft right now. I'm not sure if that will actually happen by the time we get to the deadline, but I'd be very surprised if I was tripled up. And I'm not even completely sure right now about a double up. And it's all just circumstance. If Liverpool had doubles, it would be different. If they had maybe a few more green fixtures, it would be different. And I'm sure they'll come in later. But right now, I'm not 100% certain about them. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And then you've got Southampton, who do have a new manager, and obviously time will tell whether he improves them from an attacking perspective, from a defensive point of view, maybe even both. And obviously you do sometimes get that new manager bounce. He's had time to work with a lot of the players over the World Cup break. I don't think Southampton had a huge amount of players that went off for international duty. But when you think about new manager bounce, you have to have some players already there that get you excited from an FPL point of view. And I'm just not sure Southampton have got any of those players. Like, you look at James Ward-Prowse, who a lot of people talk about from a consistency perspective. He's on 0.23 expected goal involvement per 90 so far. And if you look at the numbers, he's their top midfielder at 2.9 points per match. That is just not great at all. And I just don't know if he's suddenly going to become this better attacking player. I know he's on penalties. I know he's a great free kick taker. But if he doesn't get those set pieces, from open play, he just doesn't get you a huge amount of points. And there's not really any other midfielders there that would get me excited. Then you've got Adams, for example, 6.4 million. I mean, to be fair, 0.47 expected goal involvement for someone that costs that little is not that bad. But we only have 3 forward spots in our FPL squads. We know that one is going to be taken up from Haaland. Another one is probably going to go to Mitrovic for a lot of people because of that double game week in game week 19. And if you do that, and you've got one more forward spot to fill, Is it going to be on Che Adams from Southampton? Probably not. And don't get me wrong, like they got those nice fixtures, Fulham away, Nottingham Forest in game weeks 18, 19. I just don't feel like they're the kind of side that I would want to take a risk on. If I was going to go for one of their players, it might be Perot at 4.4 million, who's at 0.25 expected goal at the moment. That's pretty decent for a defender. But then you come back to these numbers so far, and their defence is what, middle of the road, like 13th. It's not awful, but it's not great either. So I'm just looking at this team thinking I'd have to see quite a bit from the new manager to want to invest in them. And again, it all comes back to where you're going to fit these players in, like Che Adams in one of your 3 forward spots, Ward-Prowse in one of your 4 or 5 midfield spots when you got likes of De Bruyne and Salah and Almiron and Rashford and Foden and Mount and Maddison, etc., etc. That's already 7 players off the top of my head. I'm sure there's plenty of others that I've completely forgotten about. And I just don't think there's a real good case to be made. So this is one of those teams where they have got good fixtures, but for me, I just don't think they've got any players that we should be looking at. Maybe Perot at 4.4 million if you need a cheaper defender and you only want to play them in some of these fixtures, maybe the Forest game, maybe the Villa game, etc. But I don't think there's too much to get excited about here. So I'll leave that video there. There's 5 teams covered that have got pretty decent fixtures without any double game weeks. Obviously, over the next week or so, we will cover those double game weeks more. There will be plenty more videos to come. I'll probably do a rating your drafts video at some point soon as well. But if you enjoyed that video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and I'll catch you again soon.